Hi everyone, Bob here again for another WordPress tutorial. This is the second in the series. The last one we went and installed WAMP, which is the Windows Apache MySQL PHP server that you can use to run WordPress locally on your machine. This one we're going to talk about the ultimate setup for WordPress, at least for beginners anyway. And I'm going to talk about how I get the environment configured, the things I find important, and then we'll start diving into some of the things around themes and some of the other customizable pieces of the platform. And then we'll start talking about things like themes and other parts of the platform that you can begin to customize. I've had a couple people ask me why I decided to go and start doing WordPress videos. So I wanted to give a brief story here on how I got here and what made me decide to go and start, sharing some of my experience and the things that I've been learning over the last year or so. And the story really started many years ago. I had a blog. I used WordPress to do that blog. This is way back in the early 2000s when WordPress first came out. And it was a whole different game back then. I used it on and off for several years, and then probably took a couple of year hiatus, and then recently got back into it in the last year and a half. And the changes to the environment were quite dramatic, and it took me a while. It was a lot of frustration, to be totally honest, to kind of get productive, to get things figured out, to figure out what type of editor I wanted to use, because there were so many different options. A lot of them cost a lot of money, and I was really kind of struggling to figure out what was the best approach. So I wanted to kind of explain a little bit of that, and a little bit of how I got here. I at a couple different points almost went back and said WordPress is unusable for me at this point. I can go back and use Bootstrap and just regular PHP or Laravel and be much more productive and get things done. I didn't want to be stuck in that place though, so I stuck with WordPress just so that I got a lot of the features and functionality that come with it, and I could do things a lot quicker for our customers and helping them build websites. So I figured it all out. I spent a lot of time, lots of trials and errors. I understand why the community is very frustrated with the platform these days. There are a lot of things that I think can still be improved, but I'm going to help you try to get to where you don't have to go learn it all by yourself and try to figure out the do's and don'ts. This is essentially the video, at least the video series that I wish someone had made about a year and a half ago. So that's the point of all this. And I'm going to explain, my first out of the gate frustration was with themes. And I'd used the classic WordPress editor in the past, so that was kind of my comfort zone. Back in those days, there weren't a lot of builders. You were still going in and doing a lot of editing on WordPress core, which I learned how to figure out and to do different versions and how to manage changes at that level. But this was a whole new ball game when I started playing around with the platform in its recent history. And one of the reasons I got frustrated real quick was every theme that I selected seemed to have a whole different building engine to it. So, the first one that I pulled up was the classic editor, I think it's called now, which other people call Gutenberg, I think, which is this kind of look and feel. So many of the themes that I've selected gave you this kind of view, which and then they're all different depending on which ones you select. They've the layout's different. You have different options here. The next one I played around with was what we now call the block editor, or the default WordPress editor, which I thought, all right, this is interesting. I can start playing around with this. I like, the idea of navigation, styles, pages, templates, and patterns. That seems pretty self-explanatory. Hint, it's not. And so I thought, all right, this is a good place to start. I can probably get into this and figure it out pretty quickly. Knowing WordPress development in the past, it was always pretty user-friendly. And then I went and downloaded another theme, and I got this view, right? So kind of the block editor view, but enhanced. So let's call it Block Editor Plus. So depending on certain themes that you can select, they have their own builders built into the theme, which goes and alters your your development environment. Not someplace that I wanted to be, because I don't want to be bound to any one theme or any particular pattern that I have to go use for doing development. So I kind of kept looking, and then I found the first of many of the builders, which I thought, all right, this is a shortcut. I can be productive quickly. I can get into some of these and figure them out. But I learned in a short period of time that most of the functions or features in a lot of these builders you can't touch unless you're going to pay for the pro version or the upgraded version. And then I went and looked at what some of those cost, and the fact that you have to pay for every site, or you're paying every year, it just seemed to be not the direction that I wanted to go. So I went and I struggled with the block editor. So this is the editor that I finally chose. It's where I think I've developed most of my skill set at this point. I've gotten to be pretty successful and pretty fast with it. And there's some shortcuts and things that I have learned that really increase my productivity. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what that base build looks like. So if you're going to go and start building custom websites for customers, or if you have multiple websites that you want to build for yourself, what's the most efficient and productive way to do that? For me, it's, go get that base environment built, get the theme that you want loaded, get it customized to the degree where you're ready to actually start putting customer content in there and customer media, and then essentially do a backup of that environment where you can replicate those steps that you took very quickly just by dropping in a backup of an environment into a new site, and you're literally ready to go and start adding content, images, and just work on not the layout so much, or some of the functionality, but really just getting choosing the right patterns that you want in certain spots of the page and different sections, and then just dropping in the content that you are working with with your customer for whatever their business needs are, or corporate, or whatever the circumstance might be. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to dive right in with an environment that I've set up for doing just this. So we'll go and jump over there and get this kick started. Diving right in, a couple things I want to explain first, because your environment may look a little bit different. If you've gone and installed WAMP or XAMPP and you're running WordPress locally, you're going to have a different presentation, or at least a different view potentially, than if you're running it on a hosted site. So I'm going to show you what both of them look like, because you may have some things that your provider, your host, is giving you for free as part of your subscription that may be a benefit to you. So there may be some plugins that are in the base WordPress deployment, or their default deployment, that you may find actually useful, and you may want to take advantage of, especially if they're paying at the pro level and you get a bunch of features and functionality in there that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise, or you're going to have to go pay for. So this is my hosted site, where I run a lot of my web pages. The company is called Name Hero. I went with Name Hero just because they have two things: good, affordable pricing, and then they're one of the highest rated for performance. So I don't need a lot of bells and whistles. I can do most of the things myself. But with Name Hero, you get all the emails you need. You can run as many websites as you want, and then you get the actual response time performance, to where if you're going to be using Page Insights and some of those tools to go measure performance on your page, you need a good hosting provider, especially if you're doing a lot of work with images and photography. So Name Hero is a good balance, I think, of price and the performance that I want for my websites. I'm a bit of a nut on performance, okay? So when I go and deploy a website on Name Hero, I get a whole list of plugins that come with it. So, I think there's 13 or so different plugins in here. Everything from SEO. There's a block page builder plus tool on here called Page Layer. It's actually got some pretty nice components to it. SMTP for doing email and that type of stuff. Backuply. Most of these things I don't use and I would never use. So I have my own plugins, which I'll share with you in either this video or the next, that we'll kind of go through, and I'll tell you why that I find them valuable. And a lot of what I'm looking for in a plugin is multiple features that I can do multiple things with a single plugin, so I don't have a lot of overlap between different plugins, and then that they're not a performance hog, right? So a couple of them that I'll show you, I'll point out that there is a degradation of performance if you're going to go with some of these things. So there's a balance, right? You have to go figure out is the visual representation I'm getting and some of the benefits of a specific plugin worth the hit to my SEO ranking and potentially customers coming to the website. Something that only you would be able to decide. If I'm going to deploy a locally deployed version of WordPress like I have here, right, this is the upgraded version from the previous video. So in the last video I deployed 6.7. So now this one's already upgraded to 6.8 or 6.81, I think. And you'll notice there's only 2 plugins here, which is good because I'm going to delete them all, right? I have my own list of plugins. I'm going to deploy them, get them configured, and they're going to be part of my base site deployment. So every time I go and build out a new site, I'm going to start with that list of plugins. And then there's a couple that I may add in depending on the customer needs or what they're trying to do with the website. So that's kind of my approach to kind of getting that base build out and then being able to drop in for a new website when I'm ready and I'm actually ready to start doing some work. So for this one, we're going to, first thing right out of the gate, we're going to drop out the pre-installed plugins. And both of these really aren't of any benefit anyway. Hello Dolly is, I think, pretty useless. And then the anti-spam one is not something I'm worried about because I'm not going to have any comments be allowed. So that's not something that I'm really too worried about. And then the next thing we're going to dive into is the settings tab. There's a couple things in here that you should take note of, right? And I'll try to point out the important things. But on the first page you got your site name, you got your tagline, which is really your slogan, let's say. And both of these are going to be really important for search engine optimization. So take some time to make sure that you're hitting the right note with your company tagline or slogan, putting it in here so you do get noticed by the indexes for the actual purpose of the business or the site. You can choose your site icon here. So I think you'll go with the default typically, which is the WordPress icon if you don't put something in here. So you've got a little minified version of your logo. You can put that in here. And then your the URL, site URL. Be careful with these. If you go and start altering these, your URL hasn't actually changed. You could basically make your admin console unconnectable. So don't go change these too much. WordPress is actually really good at picking up your URL and doing the deployments. So I typically try not to mess with these too much unless I have to get into something crazy. And then if you do mess with them, there's a way that you can get into the database and alter them so that they go back to your default URL. Okay, so you're never really dead in the water. And then everything else I kind of leave the same: admin, email address, all of the other stuff. I'm not too worried about too much with this site just because this is a dummy site, so I'm just going to delete it when I'm done filming the videos. The next part is writing. The only real thing here on this page is the mail server. So if you're going to be doing, especially if you're sending in posts from mail, this is going to be necessary. And then the vice versa of that is that if you're going to be doing any emailing from the platform itself, whether for resetting IDs and passwords, that type of stuff, sending people notification for a blog update or whatever, you can use that email address for some of those notifications. Reading is a big one. I'm not going to change anything on this page yet because there's a big gotcha with the block editor that I want to point out because it'll save you a ton of time when you run into it. It's one of the things that I found really unnerving about WordPress in this time around is that it's really hard to find where, something's happening in your site and where that setting might be causing that. So there's a couple things related to the setup and the settings in here that will have an effect on everything in your block editor, from templates, patterns, to a couple other things. So I'm gonna go through breaking it first, and then I'll show you how to fix it and why. If you see that particular problem happening with your deployment, hopefully the light kicks on a little and you go, I remember seeing that. So go in and change the settings, and I'll show you how to do that once we get to it. Okay. Move your post feed to excerpts, another SEO trick. So you don't want the full text showing in your blog post if you're doing blog posts. So it's a little bit more readable for the indexing algorithms that are going to go scan your site and put them into search engines. So go ahead and save your changes. And then the big one of the big ones here is the discussion, right? And for me, like I said, I've had WordPress sites in the past where I allowed comments, and I spent time almost every day just going and removing spam from the comments. So, people are hawking their own stuff or products or whatever, and they just have bots that basically scan for websites that allow comments, and they'll just go fill up your entire comment queue in no time. The way to get around that is allow people to submit comments on new posts. Should be unchecked, right? So now no one can submit comments on new posts. And that's pretty much it. I don't really mess with anything else here. So I can go and save that. And then this is a big one. So the way WordPress works by default is every time you upload any media, and images especially, WordPress is going to make a small, medium, and large copy of that image and make it available to you. So I don't really need this. I'm pretty good with the graphics editor. I can manage my image size on my own, depending on where that image is going on the site. I try not to do too much scaling of images through the editor, so I'm very aware that I want the image size to be right with the right resolution for the pages that I'm building. So I'm pretty conscientious about, and I don't need WordPress to make copies of every image that I'm loading. So the way to get around that is just set all of these to 0. I also don't do very heavy image sites. So I try to reuse a lot of stuff, and I don't typically get into dozens and dozens of images unless I'm doing something for photography, which I'm doing a little bit for myself right now. But so there may be some benefit for your site if you're doing a lot of media, a lot of stuff with images, and you want them to be organized better. You can go ahead and check that box. Permalinks, I always switch these over to the post name. Again, it's an SEO trick, so you have the post name basically going to be searchable versus the day and the name as well, right? So it's shorter, it's easier to go and pull up, easier to point to from other websites. So getting backlinks back into your posts, it's the way to go. Privacy, there's a privacy page that's kind of built in with every site deployment. So you can go edit this, create your own. You will have a default privacy page that's built into the tool for you up in your pages selection, which we'll go and check out next. So every deployment's going to have some are going to have more than others. The thing you want to do first, though, for me, is what I always do. I take the sample page and we're going to edit it. And the way to edit it is over here. You can just go and rename it. And I'm just going to name it Home for now. And then I can go back. So now I've got my home page. And then the privacy page, or the privacy policy page, is still in draft mode. So I'm not going to be displaying that anywhere. And for now, I can just go and use that if I want, or I can go and edit it to get it to, what we want for the site. All right, next thing is my themes. All right, so by default, I'm typically going to have a couple themes built in, depending on who your host provider is. They may have some relationship with a theme developer, so they may include some of those in your site by default. You can delete them, keep them, whatever you need to do. I tend to run really light, so I remove all the themes that I'm not going to be using. I may keep the 2025 theme around just in case I have to do something like, an emergency fix, or swap over to something else just to kind of see if there's something broken in the theme that I'm working with. But for the most part, I get rid of everything. You just go and click on the theme, click delete, and you start freeing up space to do other things. There's two themes that I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about themes and where I see them sitting in the WordPress ecosystem at this point. I think for some people, if you're just doing a quick and dirty website, themes have a ton of value, right? You're not going to go and change any of the layout. You're going to stick with everything that's in that default theme. You might make some minor adjustments, but pretty much you're going to go edit some images. You're going to edit the content and the text. You're going to, swap out a couple sections maybe for something else. You're going to do a couple pages, maybe a couple blog posts. Themes are great, right? So go find one that fits your needs. Got the color palette that you like. It's got the right fonts, and you're off to the races. You can spit something up really quick, and you got a website in a day or two. I, however, am not going to use that approach. I tend to do a lot of customization. The theme for me is pretty minimalistic, so I'm not really interested in a heavy theme. Chances are I'm going to take out most of the components of the theme, and I'm going to reproduce my own patterns for the way I like to build sites and some of the look and feel that I like. So for me, what I'm looking for in a theme, and what I've discovered is really the biggest thing about themes for me at this point, is the fonts and the color palettes. So if I can get a good series of color palettes that I can choose from to start, right? So, primary colors, go with, whatever the major color of the site or the brand is going to be. And then I can add from that to go and get more colors in that palette. The other big one is fonts. So there is a little, let's call it a hitch with WordPress. This is the Ollie theme that I'm going to install. I'll show you that first. Yeah, the hitch is called FOUC, Flash of Unstyled Content. And basically what happens is if you load your own fonts, and those fonts have to be basically, uploaded by the browser so that you can view them, you're going to have a little bit of a delay while that font file gets pulled up by your browser and you can display. So FOUC is basically what happens in WordPress is the default font will be shown first on the page, and then the downloaded font or the custom font will then be moved in as it becomes available. So the idea is that the person sitting out looking at the page is not waiting for the fonts to load. It's going to load the default font first, and then as it gets the files for the other fonts, it'll switch over to those. The effect is that you see this flashing happening on the page. There's all kinds of different remedies out there in CSS. There's other ways to do it, even JavaScript, I think. But what I've found is there's a better way, and I'll share with you what that is as we get a little bit deeper into the series. But for the most part, you see when I choose a base block theme like Ollie. Ollie is bare bones. You can pretty much use it from scratch. I don't really use any of the components in Ollie, but there are some patterns in there that are really good, and there's some other the color palettes I find are really good as well. The thing that I do struggle with Ollie is the fonts. So one of the things I do if I'm looking for new themes, the way I kind of go about it is I activate the theme, I pull it into the block editor, and then I typically I'm going to go click on typography, and now I can see all the fonts that are available with that theme. So you can see with Ollie, there's only 5 fonts available. They're all kind of in this mono sans format, which typically I'm going to want, some type of serif font in there. And then depending on the customer and their logo, the idea for the website, I may go and get some custom fonts to use in other places in the website. And I'll show you how to go and load them a little bit later. But what I wanted to share was that, from the theme perspective, take a look at the fonts that are available. That should be one of the driving factors that determines the theme you're going to use if you're planning on doing a lot of customization. Colors, same thing. You're going to see different sets of colors available for different themes. So one of the things I like about Ollie is that I get all of these color patterns to choose from, so I can switch over to green. And then if I want to enhance that palette, or I want to go and have a whole different set of colors available to me, I can just start adding them right here. I can put in the hex code here, however I want to do it. So I'll typically go and generate a color palette. I have a website that I use to go and do that, so I'll share that with you once we get to that, once we start setting up the whole theme. For the most part, that's how I go and look at themes and make a selection. I'm not going to save any of this. The other theme that you should take a look at if you're going to stick with the block editor is Neve, assuming that's how you say it. And it's the Neve FSE, right? Which I can't remember what site editor, something site editor. But we're going to install FSE. We're going to activate it. And then you can see I have another menu selection here, so the theme changes my menu look and feel a little. I'm going to go back to the editor, click on styles again, over to typography, and now you can see I've got a whole list of fonts. Everything from Montserrat to Open Sans. So, there's a couple that I typically use in this. So if I'm doing a lot of font heavy work, this is typically going to be a theme that I'm going to consider. All right, but again, I do have my own bundle of fonts that I'll load for most of the sites I'm developing, and then I may do some custom ones depending on the customer logo, their look and feel, and everything else that we're doing. So for this one, though, we're gonna stick with Ollie, just because it's easy to use. It's really consistent. The developer for Ollie is really good about making updates, so there's almost an update every week or two. And you never really run into compliance issues with versions of WordPress. So let's go back and switch out to the Ollie theme. And now we're back to Ollie. Okay, so our plugins are gone. Our settings are done. We got our theme. We got some dummy posts sitting here, so we just have a hello world post. And you can see this is a nice clean menu. Not too much stuff going on here yet. So now we're ready to start installing our base plugins. Okay. So we'll jump into the next video to start putting in plugins and to go and start setting up our theme. After that, we're going to dive into the whole theme layout approach and how you can start using the blocks, which blocks work better with others, and you'll get a real good base understanding for how the blocks work and how they integrate with each other. And I think you'll get a lot of value out of that. Last thing for me today, or one other thing that I wanted to mention, I have to give a shout out to some of the YouTube channels that I've really learned from over the last year and a half or so. And there's 2 in particular. Jamie Marsland is I think he's he runs the WordPress.org YouTube channel at this point. He's really big in social media, lots of great stuff out of Jamie. I would say Jamie is, one of the top WordPress designers. So he's got a lot of look and feel type of stuff that he does really well. So I've learned a lot from him as far as, going and using the block editor to kind of get techniques out that you're not going to expect to be able to get out with the block editor. I think he's also really kind of pushing WordPress development in a lot of ways to make sure that those design options become part of the core going forward. The other gentleman that I watch a lot of, and I'll put both of their links in the description, as well as flash their websites up on the page, is Jackson. Jackson is, in my opinion, he's a master of CSS. If you get nothing out of watching Jackson's videos, watch how he uses the debug tools in the browsers, how he goes and modifies CSS in real time. He's really good at trying to, use some coding capabilities in the platform to really enhance the block editor and some of the things that he's doing with his website. So he's also got a ton of great insights on plugins. He's a performance nut like myself, so I certainly admire that aspect of him. I've learned a lot from both of those gentlemen. So, like I said, I'll put links in the description. Go check out their websites. Ton of great stuff there. I'm trying to fill in the gaps from what I've learned from them, what I think would help others. So that's kind of the point of all this. Okay, and that's it for me today. We'll see you in the next video.